and then how this existing first generation and second generation solar cells are appeared or like invented, and then what are their current status, and what we are doing in those two different areas. And then I'm going to give some emphasis on the nanotechnology, how this is like being helped for developing or like fabricating the next generation high efficiency solar cells, and then some of our accomplishment in this third generation solar cells, and what is the prospect of this technology as long as India is concerned for the wide scale renewable electricity. So before starting into the my technical slides, I always like try to give a kind of outreach for our institute, because ours is a kind of a DST lab and not so popular like IIT or IISCs. But same time, like we have a lot of opportunities for the researchers, students, and then lecturers, so they can come and carry out like a kind of wonderful activities based on their proposal, or they can be part of our ongoing activities. So these all are like a kind of useful steps for all the researchers. So please, if you have any questions, just let me know regarding like not only science but also opportunities and other related aspects. As I mentioned, ours is a DST lab located in Hyderabad. Our main campus is in Hyderabad, but we have one more center in Chennai, IITM Research Park, where the major focus is fuel cell and batteries. And we have our administrative center in Delhi as well to facilitate the patent and technology transfer and international cooperations. But I am mainly from Hyderabad, and this is the aerial view of our institute. It's a kind of beautiful campus with close to 100 acres. And on the way to the airport, if any one of you is like coming and then taking a flight, you most probably go through our institute. So we have about 10 centers of excellence in ARCA Hyderabad campus. And IIM belongs to the Solar Energy Material Center for Solar Energy Material. This is one of the latest center established in the year 2012, and I am the member in the center since the establishment. So right after my education and postdoctoral fellowships, I came back to India and then joined in this Center for Solar Energy Material, and we established various facilities, and then started slowly like activities to build the applied research related to the energy solar photovoltaics. Our major research is like not like a pure basic research. We focus a lot on applied research, and once the concept is like validated, we move to the prototype and pilot scale demonstration and evaluate these prototypes in the real-time field condition, and develop the technology, and ultimately looking for the transfer to the industries, especially Indian industries, those who want to develop their products for the business opportunities. Okay, so these all are like intro about our centers, and then let's come into the solar photovoltaics, one of the fascinating field very recently for most of the emerging researchers. So as we know that sun is like a kind of eternal energy resource, and whatever the energy we are driving from this like kind of a wind or biomass or fossil fuels, all are coming are sourced from the sun energy. The only difference is the time scale or the process. Let's take like wind is created when the solar energy creates the temperature difference. Biomass is like derived from the solar energy captured and stored in a different like a biomolecules. Fossil fuels are like nothing like same thing trapped and transformed under the geological process over millions of years. So all the energies, whatever we are talking and we are using, are derived directly or indirectly from the sun. That is a point I would like to mention here. And we must know how the sun be like sun is a kind of eternal energy, right? Like how long, like how long, like continuously giving energy, right? Have you ever thought like what is the mechanism behind that? Nothing is like very excited. Most of us studied in our high school physics or high school science, but still it's interesting to see like what is happening in the, inside the sun. You look at the bottom image of this slide, is a kind of a nuclear fusion. So 4 protons comes together and form the helium nucleus. If you calculate this mass, and then the difference is 0.0276 atomic mass unit, and you can simply convert this into the weight, and then from there you can multiply by the speed of the light, you will get energy equal to mc squared. So you know, like for this 4 protons coming together and forming a helium nucleus, how much energy is emitted or generated. And then if you just simply compare for 1 mole of protons, you will get about 2.5 into 10 power 12 joules. And here I would like to mention that most of these chemical reactions, whatever we are doing in the laboratory or explosives or some process industry, they are in the typically in the kilojoules per mole. So the nuclear fusion is about 20 million times powerful than the typical reactions happening around us on the earth. That is the point, very important thing. So if you see that 4 protons comes together, form the helium nucleus, and the rest of the mass is emitted in the form of neutrinos, photons, and so on. And our interest is lying in this photon, that's called light. So given the brief explanation for the energy source or energy mechanism happening inside the sun core, you can see that sun or solar can be a center stage for all of our activities. So we call it like a solar economy. In fact, our civilization, when we like civilize our society, all build up around the sun. You can see that the first one is like food. Food also basically like derived from the sun by using a different biological process. And then sun energy can be routinely used or like typically used to heat the living space. Like it's a cave or a modern building, doesn't matter. The sunlight is very critical to make the environment compatible to ourselves, like to living. And then chemicals. So most of this, like we know that fermentation or some of the ancient food recipes or some process to make medicines and all happen under the sunlight. So there's nothing is chemicals. And very recently, this electricity, right? So the modern inventions were like electricity. So solar energy can be converted into the electricity directly without any intermediate step. That is the 4th point. And we all know that like hydrogen energy, hydrogen also can be generated from water using the sunlight, and it can be used for powering the transportation sector. So we call it like a sun two wheels, like a fuel cells and all coming into the side. But I am going to talk more about sun to electricity, how this is happening and what we are doing at this stage. So if you see this slide, the true potential of the solar energy for the humankind can be easily understand. Like you see that if you cover the small area with a moderately efficient solar cell, I'm not talking about highly efficient, just a 10% efficient solar cell, you will get the energy required for the kind of entire civilization. So that is the one like if you see that every hour energy is equivalent to the civilized usage for the whole year. So just like a 1 hour energy, whatever sun irradiates is equivalent for hours 1 year usage. So it's a huge, right? And then why we are not doing that? As I said, like everything looks attractive, positive. It's a simple, free, there is no pollution and all. But if you look at the realistic situation, this data is a bit old because the compiled data with the authority or like verification takes a long time. So this is the one taken from the journal Nature. You see that how much electricity comes from renewables and then other remaining fossil fuels. So for the year 2011, okay, this is like for the year 2008, we consumed about 492 exajoules, and renewable energy is about 13% approximately. So the majority of the energy comes from burning the oil, fossil fuels, followed by the coal. It's very popular in India for thermal power generation, and then gas, and then nuclear energy is about 2%. And renewables, if you just again like a breakup, is 13% or 12.9 exactly, can be further like made into small chunks. But most of the things are coming from the traditional biomass. This is nothing like a firewood, how we do it in our villages and all, burning the wood or other masses. So if you exclude that, renewables are like no more relevant or like they don't have any significantly high percentage. In that one, direct solar energy, whatever I have shown in the previous slide, sunlight into electricity is just 0.1%, right? Even not 1%. I would like to mention 0.1%. But people talk a lot about solar cell. This is the very brief, realistic picture. So why this is not happening? Why solar energy is not so popular for the practical applications? Nothing else. It's just simply cost. If you look at this figure, the cost for generating a 1 unit electricity kilowatt hour, whatever we are using for like our day things, you see that the solar is very high. If you take about like a calculate, this may come about 30 to 40 rupees at the time. Now the price decreased for most of the technologies, including solar, but still solar is very expensive. The cost of the electricity generation for solar is higher compared with all other things. But in all remaining stuffs, we conveniently ignored the pollution cost. If you include the pollution cost like emission, carbon trade, carbon tax and all that, this values goes up. Now all that coming into the picture. But still, solar LNG, like in solar, there is no pollution, so the production cost appears very high. So we have all people are trying to, like most of the scientists and engineers, trying to reduce the cost of the solar electricity so that it can be competitive with the conventional energy generation approaches and people can afford to buy. So this was the situation happened in 2010 or before that. And if you see that how much gigawatt of solar electricity installed throughout the world, you see that it's like a practically very small numbers, it's 0.6 gigawatt. It's like a 100 megawatt unit. So if you look at that, it's all like a cumulative, slowly came and picked up exponentially in 2008 onwards. You can see that 100 gigawatt, right, in the year 2011 or 12, yeah, 100 gigawatt. This is for the entire world. If you look at that specifically for India, you can break down this 100 gigawatt of solar electricity installed in the year 2012. You can see that top is like Germany, followed by Italy, USA, and all other countries. And you see India, you can, anyway, most of the participants might have eagerly searching where is the share for India. So no, we are in this 6.7% under the rest of the world category. So we are not major deployed solar electricity or something as of 2012. But things were changed. As I told, I joined in ARC 2012 and the ARC started a Center for Solar Energy Materials. Actually, the same year, Government of India launched the Jawaharlal Nehru National Solar Mission. It's a kind of ambitious solar mission to make or deploy more solar electricity technologies around the country for making the renewable electricity. So as part of that, some of the organizations started their research and development center, and ours is one of the category. So that is the story behind the establishment of Center for Solar Energy Materials in ARCI. So you can see that. So as of 2013, our installation capacity 1.9 gigawatt. We slowly picked up. It's all cumulative. So here that cumulative means 2013 to 14, we installed only 0.5 gigawatt. So it slowly adds up with the previous year. So picked up in 2017. It's like a 17 and then it goes up, and our target for 2022 is 100 gigawatt. It's a kind of an ambitious gigawatt plan. So I told that in 2012, entire world installed 100 gigawatt and India set a target of 100 gigawatt by 2022 only for our country. So the yellow color indicates the projection. You may wonder like what is the situation or how much we achieved in this target. So you can see for 2017, we are almost met our projections or targeted installation capacity. 2018 also we performed well, and then 2019 I think it's about close to 35 gigawatt. So some like a shortage was there, and we would like to see like how this trend is filled up or picked up. It's again based on various factors, but our target is 100 gigawatt, and we all are like have a very positive hope we may able to reach this target in a defined time frame. Okay, so these all are the ground level installations, but what is the science behind that? How this is picking up? If this is picking up now, why not done previously? All these things can be understood by following the scientific rules. So if you look at the solar irradiation, that is the sunlight comes, emits from the sun and then enters the Earth's surface. Like this is the typical Earth energy budget. So we emit 64%, and then all these things are like happening at various spheres and all. So I'm not going to talk much about that, where it is getting absorbed, how bioorganism used, and all other things. But the interesting part is the spectrum, the solar light spectrum. This is like a sunlight is nothing simple electromagnetic spectrum, and the wavelength spans from 200 nanometer to 2000 nanometer. That is a majority of the energy lying in this portion. And if you look at the intensity or the energy the most of the energy is concentrated in this visible range, 0.4, it means 400 nanometer to about 700 nanometer, right? So that we call visible spectrum. So the remaining 7% is high energy photon in the UV range, UV-ABC range, 7%. And beyond 700 nanometer, we call it like a near infrared. So that accounts for about 37%. And then we have far infrared and then microwave and then all other things comes into the very less intense spectrum. So if you see this, like you can understand from this why most of our solar cells or R&D activities for the development of solar cells are concentrated on this particular energy range, 400 to 700 or 800 nanometer range, because there only more energy is available in the sun spectrum. So if you develop a cell to capture this particular portion, you can get more energy. But if you develop a cell in this range, even your cells works very fantastic, you may not be able to get a high energy. That is the reason where more available, we want to focus to get more. That is the simple maths behind the spectrum. And that is the one, whatever I have shown in the previous slide is the spectrum on the Earth's surface. But if you look at this, solar energy also not uniformly available throughout the world because of the coordinates. You can see that this color graph indicates the world in a two-dimensional format. So the dark red indicates high intensity and blue or like a green, light green indicates weak intensity. So you can see that some portion of this like Australia or Africa or this Gulf and then Europe and South America all gets a very high intensity in the selective region. And India, you can see that we are not very bad, but like we call it like a very good sun sciences. So we also getting not like this high intense, but moderately okay. Means the energy available to India is potentially commercially interesting to convert into electricity. And if you again further focus in country level, you can see the detailed distribution, except a few places in Rajasthan, like where high intensity comes, or more or less all are close to 200, but in India, our sunny days are very high. It means you have a more sunlight throughout the year. So you can rely the solar energy for the continuous electricity generation. That is the point from this slide. Okay, so I explained the basics of the sunlight, how it emits and how it reaches, and in India, how much we are getting with respect to particular places. So sunlight is coming. So how to capture the sunlight and convert into the useful electricity is the science, right? So it can be captured and converted into the useful electricity, useful energy by various processes. The first one is a solar thermal. I think yesterday Dr. Saktivel is like my colleague from the same organization might have given a talk about solar thermal. There the sunlight is captured by the solar thermal system and developed as a heat. So just I would like to mention that photons were converted into heat, and that heat can be used for doing any useful work. Let's say like you can use the heat for heating the water, there's like a solar water heater, or you can use it to create a steam. So like in the solar industrial process, steam will be generated by passing the heat to the water, and the steam can be used for a typical work. Like in Tripur, they use the steam for making dyeing factories, like for improving the reaction of dye with water and cloth and so on. And then sometimes if you create a high pressure steam, the same steam can be passed to the conventional power generation system to rotate the turbine. So solar thermal heat and again electricity is possible, but that is indirect approach. The second approach is a solar fuel. You can capture the sunlight, hydrolyze the water or any other suitable solvent or electrolyte, convert them into the hydrogen. You can store in a different form and then pass to the electricity. You can get that's passed to the fuel cell to generate the electricity for use. But this all like a multi-step process, the solar thermal and fuel. The photovoltaic, we call solar photovoltaic. The simple direct step, you can see that you just put the solar panels under the sunlight heat, and you will get the electricity. And the beauty is there is no any moving part in this system. It's a simple stationary plate. So what is the advantage of a stationary plate compared with other moving objects? Moving things means you need continuous kind of like monitoring. You have to maintain the facility. You have to take care of the facility, and life may be like a different for the system based on the quality of the products. But solar photovoltaics, there is no any movable part. You just put the plates under the sunlight, you will get the electricity as long as the sunlight is hitting the solar panel. So it's a direct conversion of sunlight, freely available sunlight into useful electrical energy. So that's a simple mechanism behind the solar photovoltaic. Okay, so then what is the operating procedures? How this can be done is the basics of the solar photovoltaics. So I assume that some of the participants are like familiar with the simple PN junction concept. So the solar cell is nothing, it derived or kind of an extended device from the PN junction. You can see from this figure, so we have two different materials, P-type and N-type. We are bringing together to form the junction. So space charge region is developed and the band gap of this material is like Eg. And once you have this things like light hits or with photons interacting with this material with energy greater than band gap, electron and hole pair can be created. We call it like a exciton. So absorption of light is the first step and then exciton forms. So the dissociated interface to become a free charge carrier. So electron and hole became a separated, and electron go towards this direction and holes follow their own preferred direction. So you will get a simple PN junction. If you are allowing, if you are collecting this electron and hole, you are getting a current. If you are not collecting, we will recombine and emit as a light. So heat, extra energy will be released in the form of heat or light or whatever the process happening. So this is simple PN junction, but solar cell is nothing. You just add two more selective contacts. The selective contacts for electron extraction and hole collection, both sides. You put the selective contact. So you are facilitating the carriers to come out of the PN junction. So you can see that you just providing a way. It's a kind of a how to say, it's like facilitating electrons and holes to come out of the device. So the same PN junction I made like in a cross section view. This is like for a solar cell, this is a P, and then this is the N junction. So electrons goes through, comes and then pass through the load where you have connecting your light or whatever the useful appliance, and you are getting the things. So the solar cell is nothing, is an extension of the PN junction with a suitable contacts for collection of electron and hole. So given that skeleton or a basics concept of the device, now easily you can figure out how silicon solar cell, the first generation solar cell, typically you are seeing around your institute or like signals or in the home, all are like a first generation silicon solar cells. They are typically made by P-type silicon. Sorry, I'm not able to see my cursor. Okay, this one. This is like the light green is a P-type silicon and the pink color one is a N-type silicon. So instead of bringing two different materials and forming a junction in the silicon solar cell, we simply take a P-type silicon and dope the top region by N-type material, in this case phosphorus. So you create a N-type range, N-type silicon layer. So P-N and then junction is this concept. So take a wafer, exposed to the phosphorus gas, create the N-type doping, you form a PN junction. Once PN junction is there, you have to apply the suitable contact for electron and hole collection. So the rear contact is aluminum in silicon solar cell and the front side is a silver grids. And you add this anti-reflective coating. This is a performance value addition component because some lights were escaping from the device, so they made an anti-reflective coating. And then your cell is working. The first cell, which was built in 1954 in the Bell Laboratory, was about 6% efficient, but lot of science and development activities happened and optimized all these interfaces, junction and then quality of the material and how to collect these carriers more effectively before we recombine, and then added like a value added components like anti-reflective coating and then easy-to-clean coatings. So the efficiency of the current state of the art device is more than 25%. And if you look at the commercial scale modules, they are performing close to 20%. That is the status of the first generation silicon solar cells. So this is the typical process how we make in the how we fabricate the first generation solar cell. The raw material is like a freely available silica. This is just a sand. you can reduce this silica into the silicon by a thermal reduction process, thermochemical process. Normally magnesium is used, and then you will get a low purity silicon. So SiO2 became a Si, and then it can be further purified to remove the defects, impurities and all. So why I am highlighting this process? Generally, people know that silicon solar cells are expensive, but you see that none of these materials are not expensive, right? Then why solar cell became expensive? That is the like a process. So the process is not cost effective. In this case, when you move from silica to low purity silicon and high purity silicon, you have to spend a lot of energy. So the cost of this high purity silicon is much higher than the low purity silicon. So in this way, the cost of the material is going up. Once you have high purity silicon, it can be melted, and then you can grow this monocrystalline ingots. That is called like a single crystalline silicon solar cells. As shown in this top panel, you get a seed and then grow, and this is a single crystal ingot. It's like the ingot means it's kind of a tubular structure of silicon. It's not tubular; it's a rod. Then you can slice it by the help of a saw or like a laser or any other cutting tool, and then shape it. You will get a P-type silicon, and then dope and use a silicon solar cell and assemble the cells into the module. You will get a solar panel. This is a typical industrial process. For a polycrystalline or multicrystalline, also same process. Instead of growing the single crystals, here the crystals were silicon is melted and casted into the crucible. You will get the blocks, and you can slice them and get it. But we are not a single crystalline as in the case of previous attempt. So we have a polycrystalline. Polycrystalline cells are also doing well, and the current the efficiency difference between a single and polycrystalline is like rarely 1 to 2% in the cell level. And this is the power plant what we have established in our institute for monitoring and some R&D applications. We have about 500 kilowatt rooftop solar power plant installed in most of our building rooftops, and we are generating electricity and feeding to the grid and using for our domestic purpose also. But why I'm saying that, like this all are for our ground level R&D work. So now some of the cells are suffering from their performance loss in Indian environmental conditions. So we are working on this aspect. I hope yesterday Dr. Saktivel might have gave some pictures about ECT clue and anti-reflective coatings for a first generation solar cell. I'm not going to touch anything in that in this talk. Okay. So far I briefed about the first generation solar cells. The second generation solar cell is like you can see that the same concept. The notable difference is thickness. That is why we call thin film solar cells. If you're able to recall my previous slide, silicon solar cells are made up of 300 to 500 micron thick silicon wafer, right? So we need such thick wafers to absorb 100% of the incoming sunlight. So they are like require more material. So people thought that if you reduce the material thickness, you may able to reduce the cost. So that is the motivation behind the activities for thin film solar cell. So here you can see that this second generation CIGS is one of the best example. Copper indium gallium diselenide. We have a unique facility in our center and doing a lot of activities. And my colleague Dr. Sanjita is working on this one. You can see that here instead of silicon, copper indium gallium selenide is used as a absorber material, and this like the total thickness of this material is 1 micron. So 1 micron is sufficient to absorb the all of 100% of the incoming sunlight. In the previous case, first generation, you need about 300 to 500 micron. The reason is nothing else. It's like physics behind this material's structure. CIG is a direct bandgap material, so it can easily absorb the incoming photons. But for the case of the silicon, is indirect bandgap. So photon has to follow this momentum conservation and all other related laws. So they need more depth to capture or absorb by the material. That is the major difference. Okay, if you reduce this thickness from 300 micron to 1 micron, one aspect is you are using less amount of material. So you can expect some reduction in the cost. But what are other benefits? If you make the solar cells thin and thin and thin, the first advantage is the cells can be flexible. Silicon is a very rigid, it cannot be flexible, but second generation solar cells can be flexible and they are lightweight. So if you take one first generation and second generation solar cell and compare the weight, they are much less weight compared with the silicon solar cell. So wherever weight is an issue, let's take the case of rocket or flying objects or drone or rooftop installation, all wherever lightweight required, these cells can come. And flexibility requirement comes from this like portable applications. If you look at our backpack or any other electronic devices, vehicles like a car and all, where we are putting this in the rooftop now, there flexible things are required. So they're all the second generation cells are like routinely employed. So these are the possible potential areas for the thin film solar cells. So we may, like, this is the facility what we have in our institute for making a kind of a 1 feet into 1 feet CIGS prototype second generation solar cell modules. So now we are getting about 12% efficiency, and the world best numbers are close to 22%, I guess. So this chart gives the solar cell efficiency for first generation and second generation solar cells. You can ignore this magenta color, they all called for space application. You look at this blue number, it's about 27.6 or like 24 points. They are like a first generation cells. And second generation cells, all thin film technologies, copper, indium, gallium, diselenate, CDTE, and all other things. But again, like this green dot, so it shows about 19.9. This data is like in 2010. So the latest number is close to 22 point something for the CIGS solar cells. So these all are the status of first and second generation solar cells. But you look at this, all these numbers in y-axis, if you see that now efficiency is close to 20, like from 20 to 24 or 28%, except this magenta. These are multi-cells, I'm not going to talk. So you might have wondered, normally efficiency is a output by input, right? So it can be technically 100%. And what happened to the remaining things, just wondering, like all are very poor efficiency. The 1/5 only we are capturing, remaining 80% goes as a waste, or we are not at all talking about that. So that is the very interesting fact. If you look at the solar cell, so before looking at this graph, look at this picture. Pictures are more attractive, right? How many of you participants are aware of this guy? He's a Professor Sockley. Recently, I was in his laboratory. Okay, I didn't say that like organizer also not. I didn't inform that I was recent awarded a base fellowship to study the solar cell stability at Stanford University, and I rejoined in ARCA last December. So I spent about 7-8 months in Stanford University, and this Professor Sockley's laboratory was it's kind of museum there. I was interestingly like looking all these things. So Professor Sockley was the person who invented the transistor. So the guy who started with the PN junction and then invented the transistor, and during that time with his PhD student, he estimated Shockley-Queisser limit. That is the theoretical prediction of the possible efficiency limit for the solar cells. That is like very interesting. They are not directly related to solar cell research, but they were able to predict this one. And this is a kind of Bible or like a reference for all efficiency measurements and predictions. You can see that this is the band gap in x-axis and kind of like efficiency in y-axis. So if you see this as a function of band gap, efficiency can go from 10 increase, and then the maximum is about 33% and start to decrease. So technically or theoretically, maximum one can get about 33% efficiency only. The reason is, if you look other portions, this is a below band gap and this is above band gap. I am explaining these two things, just have put little attention. If you have a material with a 1 electron band gap, whatever the photons comes with 0.9 or less than 1 electron band gap cannot contribute to the electricity generation in the solar cell. Same way, whatever photons comes with more than 1 electron volt also contribute only 1 electron volt pair. The remaining energy goes as a waste. So you see that as a function of band gap, this magenta indicates the not useful photons. And these all wasted photons in the form of band edge relaxation. And this blue indicates other losses. This all means for a device need to maintain the equilibrium in the ambient condition. So all these are losses. So one cannot make more than 33% efficient solar cells. That is the single junction efficiency limit defined by Shockley-Queisser in 1950s, and this is still very well valid. So look at this. But like the factory where he made transistor, Shockley Semiconductor Limited, which was closed and converted into a supermarket now, and but still in memory of his invention and contribution and Nobel Prize, the builder made one board with transistors. This all the kind of installation of the transistors in memory of Professor Shockley. It's a Mountain View. It's very close to the Stanford University in California. Okay, so I explained what are the issues or limitations of the first and second generation solar cells. Their efficiency cannot go beyond 33%. So this all the current status as long as first and second generation solar cells are concerned. Now, nanotechnology entered into the picture with hope of breaking this ceiling. Means like you can make a solar cells with higher efficiencies than what Shockley-Queisser predicted. So with that provide a lot of hope for the research and development, and people also thought that we can make a highly efficient solar cells and you can bring down further the cost of the solar electricity. How it can be done? The first simple concept is a multiple exciton generation. I said that if you have any photon with energy greater than band gap, also produce the energy equal to the band gap. The rest of the energy, excess energy, goes as a waste in the form of heat and all. So this excess energy can be converted. You can convert excess energy from two different photons, capture and then use it for another excitation. That is called, you are generating more than one electron hole for the incident photon. So multiple exciton generation. So nanomaterials able to do that. And the second concept is like a tandem concept. You can put two different solar cells on top of each other, as shown in this bottom image. You can see that the first cell selectively capture the 400 to 600 nanometer, and the bottom cell capture the long wavelength. So high energy captured in the first cell, low energy photon captured in the second cell, and you can keep going. That is the reason I mentioned in that energy chart, multi-junction solar cells, right? So this all comes into the tandem concept. So like a perovskite or a CIGS or any quantum dots, dye-sensitive solar cells, all are providing this flexibility. How they are providing is very interesting fact. So by using this multiple exciton generation, tandem concept, and simple solution processing, if you recall the process involved with the first generation and second generation solar cells, the equipments are huge, right? So very few facilities are available to fabricate or do R&D. But third generation solar cells are not like that. Anyone can make it in their normal laboratory or home itself. That is like the simplicity in the process. You can see that this is a solution processing. So this all three advantages are available for the third generation nanotechnology based solar cells. So you see that like in this case of solution processing, you take your material in an ink formulate, deposit. So P and N junction can be prepared by a simple spin coating process, and the electron selective and hole selective contacts also can be prepared by spin coating process. You see that this is the dots one. Now this is the active range PN junction. So you have a, sorry, this is the P, and you have electron selective and hole selective contact. So your entire device can be prepared in the solution approach in a normal laboratory condition. So this all three things, multiple exciton generation, tandem concept, and solution processing, providing a hope for realizing the high efficiency solar cells. That is the beauty of the nanotechnology for a solar cell. So in ARCI, although we are working on the first generation, second generation solar cell, our basic R&D is focusing on the third generation solar cells based on the perovskite material. So it's one of the very popular technology now, and the efficiencies are very interesting. It's comparable to the first generation solar cell. So what about the perovskite? What is the structure of the perovskite? This is the typical crystal structure. It's a kind of cubical things and octahedral connected with the core of lead, and this is the typical formula ABX3. So whatever the material following the chemical formula ABX3 called perovskite, but here what our perovskite, generally this solar photovoltaic active perovskite is a little complex. You can see that A can be a methyl ammonium. It's a kind of organic It can be like methyl ammonium or formamidinium or inorganic cesium. Any one from this group can serve as a A. And B is a lead or tin or germanium. So any one is fine. And X is a halide, iodine, chlorine, bromine, some this group. So the popular combination is methyl ammonium lead iodide, which is the one invented in the year 2011 as an alternative to the dye in a dye sensitive solar cell. But slowly it evolved, and now it's like a very actively investigated as the next generation potential material for solar cells. So CH3NH3 PBI, this is the methyl ammonium lead iodide. I'm going to talk a little about our activities on this aspect in our laboratory. So we made this methyl ammonium lead iodide based solar cells after this invention. We started the major activity. As I shown previously, these all things can be done in the normal solution approach. As you can see that this is the ink. So this is the perovskite. How you prepare that? Take the solvent of DMF and put this lead iodide, methyl ammonium and iodine. Simply you mix it, and then you will get a completely dissolved precursor solution. This is that solution, and this solution can be made into the thin film form by spin coating. This is the all substrates like with the perovskite thin film. Once these films are formed, you have to make a hole transporting material and then cathodes for a conductive electron and hole extraction. You can get the device. So the device fabrication is relatively simple and straightforward. So here, like in the beginning, we made with the methyl ammonium lead iodide perovskite solar cell and got about 16% efficiency. That is the baseline for our activities in 2016. But later we moved to this multiple cations, because you can add whatever the possible candidates inside the solution to play with the material's crystal structure, optical properties and electronic properties, and you can introduce your new invention to get further improve the efficiency. That is the concept behind our R&D activities, and we made this. You can see that like the 18.4% efficiency was the one of the best number from our laboratory. Old record for this cell is about 24. And this is the device, how the prepared device looks. You can see that this is our ARC device, and this is the device what I made in my Stanford for fellowship activities. Same device we repeated there and got about 19.8, but I'm not much interested in this exact difference in numbers and all. So the thing is, we are able to make more than 18% device. You can see that this is a single substrate of 20 mm into 20 mm area. And this gold strips, each strip is called one cell. Here, this is the cell, and this all contacts. So the area of this cell is 0.12 square centimeter, as mentioned in the text. And efficiency of the single cell is 18.4. This cell may give 18.2 or 18.5. Normally, like a small variation happen in the laboratories level itself. But we normally like take an average and mention. Sometimes best numbers also mentioned for highlighting the activities. So this is the typical laboratory scale perovskite solar cells made in our ARCA, and we got about 18% efficiency. That is the point I would like to mention here. So once we made this baseline success story, as I shown in the previous slides, our activities are mainly focusing on upscaling, prototype, and then technology demonstration, right? So these cells are very small cells, and just for a proof of concept or science, they are okay. But for any practical applications, this 0.12 square centimeter means not interesting, right? 0.12 means 4 mm into 3 mm. That is the area of the cell. So what we thought, we have to attempt to make a large area device. So we put all our efforts to upscaling, upscale the device area from the laboratory scale to the prototype modules. So we set this 50 millimeter into 50 millimeter as an intermediate target to make the modules. So you can see that if the active area of the cell is increasing, efficiency of the cell is coming drastically down. 0.12 square centimeter, about 18%. And then it comes down for 1.2 square centimeter, the efficiency is about 15%. The reason is solution process The 50 mm, this is 50 into 50 and processing of the perovskite ink. We moved from the one-step to two-step sequential deposition approach. Here, first PbI2 is formed and then is converted into the MaPbI3. So the uniformity of the perovskite absorber was greatly improved, and therefore we able to get a higher efficiency device. So this is the strategy behind the upscaling of the perovskite solar cells from laboratory to the prototype module. You can see that still these devices were not perfect because some edges, like you can see these dotted circles, they are not completely covered with the contacts. That is the problem. And only middle portion is highly uniform, so edges were not perfect as we expected. So we developed some new patterning approach, and then instead of making a single large area device, we made a serially interconnected concept. So this is a complete device on a 50 mm and 50 mm, and we got now about 8% efficiency. So our target is to improve further these numbers and as close as possible to the achievements happen in the laboratory scale development. And the world records were like close to 14 or 15% in a large scale. So we are like a kind of half of that milestone and working hard to get that number. So given that process, proof of concept and upscaling, another major issue in this third generation perovskite solar cell is the stability. We are very poor under the light, oxygen and other environmental conditions. The reason is multifold. So you can see that the perovskites are excellent material for a light absorption and electricity generation, but when water interacting with them, we undergo the different degradation routes. When light interacts also, we degrades. Heat also affects the quality of the perovskite, and oxygen also reacting with the perovskite. So you see that perovskite is excellent material for solar cell, but it's not very good under the light, under the temperature, in oxygen and under the moisture. And what is the use of that material, right? It looks like ideal. You can make a perovskite device and keep it in a vacuum under the dark. It will be very good, but no use. So most of the people thought that operation stability under the various exposure conditions need to be understood in the molecular level and can be improved. Then only perovskites can take off for the commercialization. So we also started a very big activities on the stability of the perovskite solar cells, how the material is degrading, how the efficiency goes down, what are the approaches, possible ways to improve the stability of the device. So the first we have to make the encapsulation so that the material stability can be studied in an open condition. So we developed a low temperature encapsulation technique by using a UV curable edge sealing approach. This is a typical solar cell shown in this previous slides, this schematic. We made edge sealant by using a UV glue, and then glass was used as a cover because it has a very high water and oxygen permeability ratio. So we used a selective UV light to glue this glass to plates with the help of UV epoxy glue. You can see that pictures indicating the corresponding stages. So this is the laboratory scale encapsulated device. Normally people use the conventional approach, but perovskites were not stable in the temperature, right? So we have to use the low temperature approach. That is the technique behind it. It's a low temperature encapsulation. So we made the device using a no encapsulation and conventional encapsulation with high temperature application, and our own developed low temperature epoxy encapsulation. You can see that this is a degradation trend. We able to improve the stability of the device by our low temperature encapsulation approaches. So these all are the outcome in the efficiency level, but a lot of optimization, internal analysis, and then molecular levels degradation and all happened, and we used synchrotron X-rays and then in situ XRD and all other things. This is the two pictures like what we have utilized this high energy X-ray beam in Photon Factory, Japan, and Stanford Synchrotron and Radiation Laboratory in USA for understanding the degradation of these perovskites. So with this, I would like to talk about I would like to summarize my talk. I don't want to go much beyond the design, but we started our activities in the material level. But here I explain what made third generation nanotechnology based solar cells more interesting with respect to conventional silicon and CIGS things, because we are reaching a theoretically possible limit of 33% efficiency. So there is no much room for a first and second generation solar cells. So third generation nanotechnology based solar cells give a lot of scope for further improving the efficiency and the reduction in the cost. With that, we made a materials. Our perovskite activities had started in the material modification in the gram scale synthesis in our laboratory. And then we made a laboratory scale device with 16%, or like I can say now 18% efficiency. And we put our efforts to upscaling and develop some prototype modules and got about 8% efficiency. This one I didn't show in my slides, but like our final target is to develop the module with a 100 mm into 100 mm size for any practical study. So we are putting all these modules under the outdoor condition, under the oxygen, heat, and then moisture to see the power outcome, power production, the interaction with the light, and all what is happening. So this all like a ways forward to improve this perovskite technology, commercially attractive and competitive with the existing solar cell technologies. So this all are like I can simply summarizing my talk happened in the previous 30-40 slides. So with this, I would like to thank our organization ARCA because we get more of funding from our organization itself, and then some of the sponsored project, DST SERI and then TRC, and this Inspire, one of our colleagues is Inspire faculty, and Indo-US Science and Technology Forum, which gave me a fellowship to go to the Bhaskara program, and then Stanford University and SLAC National Accelerator Laboratory in California for providing the high energy X-ray beam for understanding the degradation mechanism at the molecular level of the perovskites. So with this, I would like to thank all my students, colleagues, and then technical manpowers for establishing and moving forward in this exciting area of the research. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for joining us and for your wonderful lecture.